Hello, hello. This is Kim Ades from Frame of Mind Coaching, and you have just joined us on the Frame of Mind Coaching podcast. And today I am over the top excited to introduce to you a new friend, a guest. His name is Chris Kenney. Now, before I introduce him, Chris, just hold on. I want to share with you how I found him. So I'm always learning. I'm always doing research. I'm always reading. I'm always studying. I'm always looking for things that could help my clients and things that could help grow my business. I come across this guy, Chris. First of all, he has great hair, but that's besides the point. He talks about sales. That's his expertise. But more specifically, he helps coaches and consultants deal with people who have, let's call it, buying resistance. I'm being simple about it. And so I started to watch his videos. And I think, a very scrupulous buyer. I'm very selective about who I follow and who I listen to. I really listen carefully for every word, every nuance. I listen to the positioning, the point of view, and I make sure that I'm aligned before I continue following. Well, on 98% of things, I'm completely aligned with you, Chris Kenney. And I have been watching every single video you have been putting out since I first found you. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So
I want to talk to you about the 2% that you're not. What's the 2% you're not aligned? That would be a fun conversation.
We'll get there. Well, you don't actually want to have that conversation, but we'll get there. I'm telling you, I watched everything. I wrote down notes. Like, I have everything.
Right.
So tell people exactly what you do. You help coaches increase their sales, get sales. Like, just tell me what it is that you do exactly. And by the way, I really think that what you do is applicable to any business.
Yeah, I think that's true. And basically what I'm known for is teaching coaches and consultants how to position, package, and sell high ticket programs. And then the definition, everybody always says, well, what's a high ticket program? Well, I define it as a program that you're selling for a larger price point than you thought you could sell it for. So if you're selling at 3K, it could be selling it at 5. If you're selling at 10, it'd be selling that program for 18. So it's different for everybody. You know, high ticket is a relative statement, but if I had to put it like into one sentence, if someone said, Chris, what do you do? I would probably use this sentence instead. I would say I help people become present to and accepting of their value in the marketplace.
Interesting.
So that's the main work. Now, you know, and when we think about sales, though, Kim, it goes well beyond that. And you know that because you've been watching and following it. A lot of it has to do with how people think about sales. So many people have guilt and shame about selling. They're worried about becoming, you know, being seen as pushy, being seen as selfish or arrogant or pompous. And then what usually happens because of that, that's this massive amount of societal conditioning around, you know, what sales is, and, you know, the used car salesman, snake oil salesperson. So if we're really, really worried that we're going to be perceived that way, what most people do is they massively overcompensate in the other direction. And that's where they end up undercharging. That's where they end up over delivering their services. And essentially they'll price their services really at a level that isn't sustainable as a business. And it's really sad to see. So I think the reason I get up every day and I do this work, especially in the coach consultant market, is I'm aware of what the ripple effect is. In other words, if you're in the helping profession, I'm in the helping profession, and if we can't enroll clients and help clients, what's the impact on the world? What's the impact on the families? What's the impact on the children? What's the impact on society as a whole when those that are selling help can't sell help? It's a massive impact on the world.
Well, and what's the impact when those that are selling help can't thrive and don't thrive, right? There's a bit of an inconsistency, a dichotomy, a conflict, right? Completely.
Yeah, completely.
Tell me something, though, it's from your perspective.
So bigger, yeah.
Like, I mean, I've been exposed to the coaching world for a very long time. What is it about coaches specifically? What is it about people in the helping field who don't feel comfortable asking for money. What is up with that? Where does that even come from? Like you described a little bit about it, the feeling of not wanting to be pushy. But I mean, in other industries, people are completely fine asking for money.
Well, I think in the helping profession, you end up with a lot of people that really just want to help, and they'll see a person that really, really needs help, and they know that person really, really needs help, and they know they can really, really help that person, and then they feel like they're selfish because they're going to ask for money for that help, especially if the person's in a tight financial situation. So then they get tied up in this, oh my gosh, I can really help this person, but this person doesn't have any money. So maybe I'll just do it for this, or I'll do it for very little, or I'll do it for free because they're so into, I really, really want to help. I really, really want to help. So I think that's what happens is there's that push pull between, do I help the person even though they can't afford me because they need the help? So that adds another element.
What do you recommend in a situation like that?
It's interesting. I feel like we should all be able to run businesses where you have you can comp services. That's the interesting thing. You probably never thought I would say that. If there's a person that's in your experience and you really, really, really want to help that person, and you don't want to charge that person, or you want to charge that person one third, or a quarter of what you charge your other clients, then do that. That's your right as a business owner. You can certainly do that. But when you think about the greater good in terms of what serves the greater good, if you consistently keep helping, and you keep helping for free and helping for free and helping for free, you'll end up helping less people because you'll end up out of business.
Hmm.
So, in the big scheme of things, if we can't stay in business and continue to help and continue to serve, well, guess what? The greater good is impacted. So eventually people have to charge, and we'll end up helping more people if we're charging and charging enough versus if we're not.
So, and I'll share a very quick story. I came across a young girl very recently, 20 years old, literally in university, really, really, really wants to get coached and really, really wants to pay for it herself. But it's kind of expensive, right?
Yeah, right.
So what I did with her is I said, okay, you will pay a portion of this fee, and the other portion we're going to have you do some work it off, and help us with some
Hmm.
social media. So, you know, that way there was kind of value on both sides. So I like creative arrangements, but I also really like skin in the game. If there's no
Right.
skin in the game, I find that people don't make as much progress as they could. Do you agree with that?
Oh, it's totally true. One of the things that took place for me, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about teaching what I'm teaching, is back in 2009, I was mentored to raise my fees by 500%. That's what my story was. I was at that time I was charging $399 a month for
Uh-huh.
coaching, and I was coached to raise my fees up to 2,500 a month. And it triggered all of my stuff, all my lack of worthiness, lack of value, the whole thing. Nobody will ever pay me that. All of it got triggered. So it took me about 3 months to navigate through that, and I was paying a very high ticket. This person was $75,000 for 6 months to coach with. Most money I've ever spent in terms of a 6-month coaching program. So what ended up happening was, I did raise the fee to 15,000, but it took me 3 months to do it. The first person that paid me the 15,000 ended up renewing for another 15,000. And all of a sudden, what started to happen was my client results just massively went up. And that was something that I could have never planned. I had no idea that that was going to happen. But it was one of the things that really fueled the business back then. Was I started getting these amazing client testimonials, because all of a sudden they started showing up completely different. Like when they were in for 15K, they're in. They're not waffling, they're not kind of in, they're not kind of committed. They're fully committed. And then they show up differently and they get better results.
It's interesting how that works. So I want to try to kind of rewind a few things because I've
Sure.
been following everything you're saying. One of the statements you made, and I wrote it down, is when other people object to elevated fees, it's really about you. So talk
Yeah,
to
it's
us
about
about that.
yeah. If they're objecting to my fee, so or objecting to your fee, just write this down, or anybody who's listening, please write this down. The statement is, if it triggers me, it's about me.
Okay.
If it triggers me, it's about me. So if I quote a high fee, right, and the person that hears that high fee gets triggered, like oh my god, like almost like sort of mad at me, like how could you charge such a? They're triggered. There's an emotional charge there. What's taking place with a trigger is triggers happen when somebody is mirroring back to you something that you suppress or deny about yourself.
Okay,
So
say that again.
triggers happen. Yep, triggers
Yeah.
happen when somebody is mirroring back something that you suppress or deny in yourself.
So be
So,
more
for
specific.
example,
Yeah.
yeah, so let me just give you an example. So say when I quote my high fee, you think your judgment of me in that moment, and you're triggered, right? You're triggered and you're upset, and your judgment of me is that say you think I'm arrogant for charging that. That guy's so arrogant. How could he charge 50 or 60 or 70, whatever, right? That's your judgment. The reason that there's a trigger is because arrogance lives in you, but you haven't come to terms with it yet. So therefore, when you see it in someone else, it will trigger you. It's because it's living in you and you haven't reconciled it yet. So therefore, what's taken place is if arrogance lives in you and you're burying it, you're suppressing it, you're suppressing it, you're suppressing it, you're making sure nobody ever sees that part of me that might have arrogance. When somebody else shows you arrogance, you go, you'll be massively triggered by that. So knowing that and understanding that allows me to hear if somebody gets triggered and they throw that at me, oh, that's arrogant or whatever. I know, and because I understand how triggers work, I know this is an amazing moment for coaching. So because
For
I
coaching them
understand
or
that,
coaching myself?
for me coaching them, because
Okay.
they're mad at me because I'm quoting this high fee and they're saying I'm arrogant, for example. I know if as long as I am not also getting triggered by it, right? Now I can coach them and we can talk about this arrogance trigger, because what then happens is as soon as we have this thing that we're burying, right? So say it's arrogance that we're suppressing, we're burying it, we're making sure nobody ever sees it. That's where we start to overcompensate to make sure nobody sees us as arrogant. So then we go too far to the other side of the spectrum and we start to give way, way, way too much so that nobody perceives us as arrogant. Is that understandable? Do you get it?
Okay. I'm gonna repeat it to you, and then I want to like talk about how you might coach someone in that situation. But okay, so what you're really saying is, as a coach, when I state my fee and someone responds to me by saying, "Oh my God, that's an arrogant ask,"
Right.
their response to me is really a reflection of me burying my own arrogance. Yes, did I get it?
Nope.
Nope,
Nope.
I didn't get
So
it.
it's nope, you missed it. So if
Okay,
the
great.
let's just say the prospect, let's call you the prospect or potential client. The potential
Yeah,
client, if the potential client thinks I'm arrogant, if they say you're arrogant and they're triggered, or that's an arrogant ask, the trigger, the suppression is inside of the potential client. That tells me that
I
the
see.
potential client is suppressing arrogance.
I see. Got it. Got it. Got it.
They're
Okay,
suppressing it. So
got
they're
it.
making there's a part of them
Yeah,
that's arrogant,
yeah.
but they've
Okay,
kept that in suppression. So now if somebody else shows them something that they perceive as arrogant, it wakes that part of them up and it goes rah, and then they'll attack that person. They become resentful of that person because they haven't come to terms with arrogance in themselves.
right. Okay, got it. I totally understand. So I will say it again. I think
Yes.
this is important. I think this is
It's
important
super
and
important to understand.
worth hanging out here for a minute. So in other
Yeah.
words, in Kim's words, Um, if I'm talking to someone and I say, here are my fees, and they get angry, really that anger is a reflection of their own suppressed anger. Yes?
Their own
Their anger
suppression
at
and,
you,
and
their
what they're
anger.
suppressing. Yeah, what you want to find out in that moment is what's their, in other words, if they get triggered, how do I coach them through that? I would say, tell me, let's just be honest, right? I'd say, honestly, Kim, you just heard my fee. It's, obviously create a little bit of upset in you. What's your judgment of me right now? What's your judgment? And then if she said, it's that you're arrogant, right? Or you're pompous, or you're self-centered, right? Now I'll explain that whole thing about triggers. And I'll say, was there a time in your life that you were incredibly self-centered and you were reprimanded for it? And they'll say, oh yeah, I can remember when I was 8 and I took the big piece of pie and my mom said I was self-centered because I didn't let my little brother have the big piece of pie. And I remember, and I got really emotional and I cried. So now they bury that. And then as soon as I'm sitting there in front of them doing something that they perceive as self-centered, that wakes that wound up. You see what I mean? And
Mhm.
that's where the triggers come from. So I have them look at what's their judgment. And then
And
I
are
get
they
them to,
open to that at that point? Or
the right people are open to it. That's the difference. Some people aren't open to it, but that's okay. If they're not open to that type of coaching, they're not going to be my people. Because what we're talking about here in terms of the psychology of this is we're talking about mask and shadow. Mask and shadow. Mask is the persona that you put on. It's what we let the world see. We're all walking around. This is a mask, right? This is my mask, right? Now, and this is your mask. And everybody that's just not, doing really deep work, you're seeing their mask, right? The shadow is all of the parts of self, all of the characteristics of self that we currently suppress or deny. That's what shadow is. Characteristics of self that we suppress or deny. They live in our shadow. Okay. So how the way shadow gets formed is, again, there's these things that take place, really when we're very, very young around, it could be selfish, it could be arrogance, it could be whatever. We practice that behavior at a very young age because we don't know better. And then mom or dad or a sibling or like really attacks us for it. And then we take that part of ourself and we bury it and we put it in a closet. Now, here's what happens. If we've got all of these parts of ourselves that we're constantly suppressing, think about that. Think about every part that you have that you're suppressing. Think of it as a beach ball, right? If you had a beach ball and you're standing in a pool and you have to keep all these beach balls hidden, these are the characteristics you want nobody to see, right?
Mhm.
There's one beach ball. You can throw one beach ball under the water. You might even be able to hold 2 or 3 under the water at once. But once you get to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 beach balls, guess what starts to happen? Well, when a beach ball, when it reappears, it goes flying out of the water. It doesn't just, like little pop up little teeny beach ball, right? The thing goes shooting out through the wall. That's what happens with shadow. We bury. And then when it comes out, when that shadow self appears, it appears and it's freaking ugly, right? When you think about all the different things that take place in terms of really, really bad behavior, like think about really bad sexual behavior, for example, without getting, the people that are caught with a prostitute,
Mhm.
the, you know what I mean? The pastors that end up, seducing a child or something like that, right? That is suppressed, massive suppressed sexual energy
Right.
that all of a sudden appears. And when it comes out in this massively unhealthy way. So when we're doing coaching and we're looking at this stuff, when a person is not willing to show up to sell and to ask for money, usually that's going to be tied up in shadow self. In other
Something
words,
that's suppressed.
they're massively suppressing. And when we say, if I'm showing you arrogance and that's triggering you, that means arrogance is in you, right? But here's what it means. Here's what you look at. You look at, am I being arrogant now? Have I been arrogant in the past? Or under certain circumstances, could I become arrogant?
Mhm.
That's what it means. Like if I'm showing you arrogance and that's triggering the crap out of you, there's either areas in your life now where you're arrogant, there's times in the past when you were arrogant, or under certain circumstances you could be arrogant. And then the way that that's fixed, and this shocks people, because usually, these shadow characteristics, a lot of them are ones that we want to keep hidden, right? You don't want people to see you as arrogant. But the way that you heal shadow is by looking at these parts and finding the gifts in them. Because here's the thing, if arrogance at some point in your life wasn't a gift to you, if it wasn't serving you, you wouldn't have taken it on.
Right.
So
It
whenever
protected
you
you
took
somehow.
on arrogance, it protected you in some way. So you have to find the gifts in those things. And then when you find the gifts and you start to come to terms with that part of yourself, here's what happens. Now, when you see arrogance, you'll go, wow, huh, that seems to be maybe a little bit arrogant. But you're not triggered.
Mhm.
There's no emotional charge. It's not something that's running you to make
Mhm.
sure that nobody perceives you as arrogant, right? So it's not running your business anymore.
Right. So
So
let's
that,
go back to the sales process, because I
sure,
think
sure.
this is interesting. And we're choosing arrogance, but it could be anything. It could be
Could be
like,
anything.
people hear your price and then they're like, wow, that's just too expensive.
Yep.
I just can't afford that. Right?
Yep.
Like, end of story. So or not, or not. We can you can answer that one in a minute. But let's just say it is the arrogance story and you coach them through it and they say, yes, actually that is a thing in my life. Then what? How do you go from that conversation to here are my services and here's my price again?
Yep. So once we have agreement that that's something that's in their experience and that's something that they want to, that needs to be looked at, I would say, how do you think your fear of being seen as arrogant is affecting your ability to sell?
Right, but that's in the case of someone who is trying to sell. But what if I am making a sale and the person on the other end is going, "Wow, you're like you're arrogant." So I'm not having a conversation with them about their sales.
Yeah, so if they're saying I'm arrogant, I'm going to take them through just what we talked about. I'm going to try to get them to see where that trigger is and why that trigger is alive in them, and try to get them to go, "Oh, yes, that is a thing for me. I am overly worried about that," right? So once they become aware of that, I just say, "What would change for you if you were to come to terms with that and allow yourself to show up fully? What would change?" Because right now, would you say I would get them to actually agree that they're overly concerned about showing up as arrogant? And
Right.
they'd say, "Yes, I am. I'm overly concerned about showing up as arrogant." And I would say, "How does that affect your business?"
Got it.
So now we can take that shadow thing and have them tell me how they think it affects their business
Or their lives or their
or their
relationships or
lives. Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Okay.
Lives,
Got it.
relationships with their children.
Yeah.
Because if it's affecting them here, it's affecting them everywhere. It's probably affecting them in their relationship with their partner,
Right.
relationship with staff, clients, so on and so forth.
So for people who are listening, I just want to do a little bit of translation. A little bit of translation. And so really what Chris is saying, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I have been wrong. Uh, when somebody reacts in a strong way to your pricing, right? You want to take that opportunity to actually coach them about their reaction and where that reaction comes from and how that reaction may show up in other places in their lives and how that reaction affects a lot of the things that matter to them in their lives. And it's actually an invitation to have them experience your coaching and to consider for a moment what it would be like if you had a relationship together where you coach them on all the things that were triggers for them. Did I get that
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it basically ties into one of the fundamental things that I think people do wrong when they're selling coaching is we don't want to be necessarily looking at a person's objection. What we want to be looking at, and you've probably heard me say this, Kim, is we want to be looking at what's the thinking pattern that's underneath the objection.
Hmm.
What's the thinking pattern that's underneath it? that's where the gold is. So what we have to become better at as coaches, whether we're selling or because an effective sales conversation really is a coaching conversation. Let me just say that. When this is done correctly, it's a coaching conversation. It's not this massively different type of conversation when it's done correctly. It's completely driven by questions. It's completely driven by active listening. It has nothing to do with persuasion. It has to do with asking the right questions so a person looks within and they start to become clear on their own if you're a good fit. It's not about you persuading them. So it is a coaching conversation. And if we start to think of it that way and we start to go, okay, this is what's happening, like this is what's happening, what's the thinking pattern under it? Can I give an example here? Because that's
Yes.
another statement that could be confusing, right? So if recently I had this happen, it wasn't that long ago, and I've used this example a lot. It was probably 3-4 months ago, where a person said to me, and it's a perfect example. They said, Chris, you're at a high price point. They literally said, I'm not sure my problem is urgent enough to hire you at the moment. I'm just not sure it's urgent enough to spend that amount of money. And I said, can I ask you a question about that? So that's the first thing you want to do when somebody objects is say, can I ask you a question about that?
No, you're supposed to breathe first.
Yeah, breathe. Yes. Breathe. Can I ask you a question about that? Money, you definitely want to breathe because money is a really, really emotional thing. The reason we say, can I ask you a question about that is because you want to get permission to respond to the objection, right? And that lowers resistance. They say, yes, absolutely. She said, this wasn't urgent enough. And I said, so where else in your life do you wait for things to be incredibly urgent before you take action? And she literally said, oh, I do it with she said, I did it with my weight. And I said, well, what's that look like? She said, well, I put 20 pounds on before I go on the diet that I'm supposed to go on. And I said, where else do you do it? She said, well, I do it with my spouse. I wait for things to get really, really bad before I have the conversation that I need to have. And I say, well, does that way of being serve you? And she said, no. And I said, is that way of being present here? She said, yes. And I said, so what you're saying is the way of being that's waiting for things to be really, really urgent before you take action isn't serving you. And that way of being is being exercised here. So you're behaving in a way that isn't serving you here. Is that correct? She said, yes. And I said, based on that, what do you think you should do? And there was this pause and there was this silence. And there was this light bulb, sudden flash of awareness on her part that said, oh my gosh, I think I need to hire you. And that's what happened. But it had nothing to do with me looking at her urgency objection. I never tried to make it urgent for her. I just looked at the thinking pattern that was underneath it, and that's what moved the needle.
Mm-hmm. What if someone says, look, I just can't afford it?
Yeah. So now here's the thing. How far I go with a price objection on a per person basis is going to be based on a lot of different things. Number one, how's the energy in the call,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is there a really good energetic connection?
Mm-hmm.
What do I see in this person's personality? Do I see this person as if they start with me, they're going to absolutely crush? Is this a person that would likely move fast? Is this person going to be more of a slow burn? I look at all of those things. So let me just say this. There are times when somebody objects to price where I don't try to overcome it because there's been energy in the conversation that might indicate they might not move quickly or they might not be an ideal fit for my work. Because it's not all about somebody moving quickly. Is there perfect energetic alignment? And will we both be served in the interaction? That's what I really want to know. Now, if the energy is really, really super good and there's great synergy in all these different areas, if someone says, I really, really can't afford it, what I start to look at then is now this is where you want to look at their thinking. Mm-hmm. So tone of voice when you're responding to objections is super, super, super important. You always want to be empathetic, right? So it's like, okay, so what I'm hearing is, this might be something you want to do, but at the moment you really, really can't afford it. Is that correct? And they say, yes, that's correct. And then I would say something like, let me ask you a question. They say, okay. And I say, where would you get the money if you absolutely had to get it? Where would you get it from? You'd be shocked at the amount of times when they say, well, I could borrow it. I could take out a loan. I could put it on a credit card. I could take it out of my retirement. Now, what that does is it opens up the door to the fact that you're actually in a different objection than money,
Mhm.
because they can get access to the money, right? What the objection is whether or not they're willing to spend money on this,
Mhm.
right? If somebody says I could put it on a card, or I could, for example, pull it out of retirement, which isn't an uncommon thing, they can say, well, I can pull 25 grand out of my retirement.
Mhm.
So they do have access to the money. Do you see that? It's there, but are they willing to spend it on this?
Mhm.
And then that's what I start to talk about. So what you're saying is you do have access to the money. And they say, yes, I do have access to the money. And then we talk about why, what's going on with them, what's going on with their confidence, what's going on with their belief in self that is not allowing them to spend money on this. But that's a different objection
Right.
than I don't have the money.
Right. So
It's
then you go
completely
back
different.
into coaching.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. When
Sure.
you have a conversation with someone, do you bring up your price point at the beginning of the conversation or at the end of the conversation?
Yeah, it's always at the end, always toward the end, because I want to have a value conversation first. And I also want to make sure that I connect with the person. So again, it's super important. You know this as a coach. I mean, there's times people can be the greatest people in the world, but if there isn't synergy and there isn't the energetic connection that you're looking for, you can start to see, hey, this might be a good fit or this might not be a good fit. So it's remembering that when you're in these enrollment conversations, it's really a two-way interview. It's, am I right for them, but also are they right for me?
Hmm.
So, I'll have that long conversation. We'll connect. I ask some really deep questions. I'll coach them in a way that's incredibly direct, because I know that if they can't handle that direct coaching, they're not going to do well with me. They'll struggle, or they'll, be massively triggered by the way I work or whatever it is. So that's why I quote it at the end.
You talk about this concept of resistance.
Yeah.
Tell us, I talk a lot about resistance, but I want to hear it from your point of view. What is resistance really about, and why do we experience it really on two sides of the equation, sometimes with a prospect and sometimes inside of ourselves? What's that about?
Well, I think resistance when it comes to, in sales conversations or in enrollment, the bottom line is people are bringing to the conversation. I always talk about the seen and the unseen. Have you ever heard me talk about the seen and the unseen,
I
Ken?
haven't gotten to those videos yet.
Yeah, the seen and the unseen. So the seen items in the sales conversation are all the things above the surface, what you're saying, what they're saying, their body language, your body language, it's visible, you can see it. The unseen is all the stuff that's underneath the surface. It's things like their previous experiences of being sold to, their previous experiences around money, their previous experiences around asking for money, their previous experiences about people asking them for money. So there's a lot of money baggage that sits down, in the conversation with you. So that's why it's really important to show up in a way that's different. You can't show up like every other person selling a product or service shows up, because then you're going to trigger like that resistance in a person. When you show up differently, they don't have a conditioned response to that way of showing up, right? You
Mhm.
see what I mean? When you show up differently because they haven't seen someone show up that way, they don't have a conditioned response, right? Most people have a conditioned response of how they respond to someone selling to them, right? And what's the natural response? Resistance.
Right.
So, and it ties into people have a really negative view of money going out, a really negative view of money going out. That will trigger, naturally, it triggers resistance. So, from the start of the conversation, there's different things that we want to do to lower resistance. And one of those things, and you've heard me say this, Kim, probably, is letting people know that the goal of the conversation is clarity. The goal of the conversation isn't for you to sit down and to make a sale.
Mhm.
The goal is for you to become clear. Both parties become clear. Clear this makes sense for us to move forward, or clear that it doesn't make sense for us to move forward. But it's not about, let me show up here and let me sell. And as soon as you let your potential client know that your goal is clarity, they'll relax and you will relax. It's a completely different conversation than when there's this energy of, oh my gosh, they're going to try to sell me or they're going to sell to me. What
Mhm.
you're really doing is you're just looking for clarity.
Okay. So if I invite someone to have a call with me, I state right up front, my goal is for us to come out of this call with a greater sense of clarity about whether or not we're a match.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you learn all this stuff?
Man, I feel like a combination of things. It's a good question. So first of all, my first career was in selling. So I sold in corporate America, and I sold in corporate for 12 years. And I would say that's where I originally learned how to sell, but I didn't learn how to sell coaching. I feel like I was really good at selling in corporate. Maybe some of you that are listening have had this experience where you're really good at selling other people's stuff.
Hmm.
And then when you come out of that experience of selling other people's stuff and then you have to sell yourself, it's a completely different, totally different zone. And I also believe that selling coaching is completely different. So, in terms of how I learned this, trial and error. I've created a 5-part system. I tried and I tried and I tried. And similar to some of you that are listening, when I first started, I struggled. I was doing it wrong. I was trying to convince, I was trying to persuade.
Hmm.
I wasn't looking at thinking. I was looking more at, what's taking place on the surface. I wasn't spending any time under the surface, looking at what's going on, with the mindset and all those different pieces. So it really came from, I've been doing this, gosh, I'm in my 13th year. And the other thing is, when you're teaching selling, I have heard so many sales conversations. I mean, I've probably listened to thousands of sales conversations.
Hmm.
So when you listen to thousands of sales conversations and you critique that many individuals on their selling, especially selling coaching and consulting services, you can't help but learn. So through all of that, I've created the processes and the systems that I teach.
How do you work with people now? Like, do you coach them one on one? Is this like a group experience? Is it in person? How do you actually work with people?
Yeah, there's both. So it really depends on investment level. If a person wants to work with me privately, I have one-to-one coaching programs that are 12 months. If a person isn't ready to commit, at that level, that financial level of commitment, I have a group program that is right now. Our group has 23 people in it, and it's still a high touch group. We do the way it works is, out of the month, week one we do hot seat calls, so everybody dials in and everybody gets a 15-minute hot seat.
Hmm.
And then week two, we do a live Q&A. So everybody comes in with their questions. Week three, we do hot seats again. So 15-minute hot seat again. And then week four, I do what's called a sales call walkthrough, which is where I listen to and critique a sales call from somebody that's in the group. And then we go right back to week one again, which would be hot seats. So
So
that's the
anybody
group.
can jump in at any time into the
Yeah, it's a
group
rolling
experience.
program. It doesn't have a set curriculum. It's a one, we're interacting one to one. We meet people where they are. It's not,
Hmm.
hey, month one, this is the curriculum. Month two, this is the curriculum. It's just that doesn't resonate with me in terms of programs.
Where do people find you, Chris?
Yes, there's a couple different places. I've got a private Facebook group where I do live teaching every week, and I know that you've been on there and in there. That Facebook group is called Sales Mastery Inner Circle. So hop over to Facebook, look for Sales Mastery Inner Circle. You'll be asked 3 quick questions. You answer those questions, and then my team lets you into the group. And again, I
And
do
and
live teaching in there every week. Yeah.
just to plug you a little, I'm in this group. I'm not a groupie. It's not my style, but I pay attention and I literally sit down and listen and take notes. So join it.
Yeah, that's the best spot. And then you can also find me, obviously, my website, chriskenneycoaching.com, or you can email me, chris@chriskenneycoaching.com. And Kenney is spelled Kenney. So chris@chriskenneycoaching.com, Kenney, Kenney. Hopefully, we'll see all of you in Sales Mastery Inner Circle.
Chris, You get the last word, final words of wisdom. Any thoughts for people in any industry who want to up their sales game?
Believe that it can be done. I would just say that remember that your current way of selling isn't getting you where you want to go. So whether you choose to make those changes or learn through me, make sure that you learn through someone. Because I think what happens is we try so hard. We've got this expertise, this thing we're really good at, but if we've never taken the time or invested the time or the energy or the money to learn how to sell it, the world is really, really impacted by that. So either come and get some help from me or get some help from someone else that can really, really teach you, because you have to learn how to sell if you're going to stay in business.
Chris, thank you for joining me. Thank you for answering my email, my out of the blue email.
It's a
I
pleasure.
really enjoyed this time. I'm always learning something. And again, I learned something today. So thank you so much. And please, whoever's listening, reach out to Chris. I think he's awesome. And he has a lot to teach you. So connect with
All
him.
right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Kim. Really, real pleasure to be here. Take care.